a new opportunity is taking a class trip to Gunjan's brother's house.
All right.
You take us to slide 2 now.
Well, slide 1 is what I want to talk about first, because on the top right, you see the Narayana Hospital. Some of you might know about the Narayana Heart Hospital, which began maybe 15 years ago. And the way that they offer treatment is those who can afford it pay full price, and those who can't get their stents or their open heart surgery for practically nothing. Okay, not something you see, and they're not funded by the government to do that. They just do it out of their own revenues. Okay, so I visited the Narayan Hridayalaya last year, 2 years ago now, in Bangalore. And it's actually a little city into itself. It's not just a heart hospital. They have, I think, a dozen different specialty hospitals there. And you'll see in this picture, there's construction going on here. They're always adding. So it's pretty much a world-class facility. They've been reviewed by the Mayo Clinic. They've been reviewed by the Harvard Business Review and so on. So it's the kind of hospital you would find here in the US. And at the bottom there is a picture here from the Asian Heart Institute in Mumbai, which is also an absolute world-class facility in India. Not every hospital in India is like that. Not every clinic is like that. But there's plenty of facilities in India which were established by physicians who worked in either the UK or the US and then went back, and they're running absolute top-end facilities, except of course their labor cost is lower, so they can offer a lot more nursing help and other kinds of services at these facilities. So I just wanted to illustrate that to you folks.
Robert, you already have something to add?
On that last slide, I just want to make sure I saw it correctly, that sign out front of the hospital, it says super specialty hospital.
Yes, it does. And that means it's a tertiary care hospital. If you look very carefully, you'll also notice that the word specialty is misspelled. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at with my magnifying glass.
Yeah, good. You're very
specialty.
Yeah.
That's like Obi-Wan Kenobi, right?
Sorry?
That's like Obi-Wan Kenobi speed.
Yeah.
Sith Lords are our speciality.
Yeah. You will often find the word specialty spelled with an extra I in India. So sooner or later, the Oxford English Dictionary will accept that spelling, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the spelling was Oxford style.
No, that's Indian style. But there will soon be more English speakers in India than any other country in the world. So just like India controls cricket worldwide,
right,
start controlling the English language. But
good on you. That's cool.
Yeah.
Stick it to the colonizers.
Right, exactly. Well, we've already got a prime minister there of Indian origin, so in the UK. So okay, let's. So India has been in the news quite a bit. You might know that they were the president of the G20 until next month, actually. And President Biden visited India as part of that G20 summit. He's been invited to India again in January for the big National Day, Republic Day celebration. India is also becoming a much closer, I don't want to use the word ally, but friend to the United States. And one of those friendship moves is around what they call the Quad. So you have Japan. This is, by the way, Consul General Kenko Sone of Japan. This is the Indian Consul General. This is the Australian Consul General. And here is a senior official from the State Department. I moderated a Quad event with these 4 countries last month, and it was an oversold event. I can send you a news item about it if you want. I'm just giving you folks this background because India is getting much more attention than it used to. Now, much of that is still not being reported in Western media. So we still, if you look at the New York Times, the stories will be more about monkeys and, Maharajas and things that most Indians don't really care about anymore. But it's starting to change. The Wall Street Journal certainly has much better reporting about India in terms of major media, and the Financial Times and the Economist out of the UK do as well. But your local paper and your cable TV channels typically don't cover India very much. And that's why I wanted to highlight some of the opportunities that now exists for medtech folks. Okay, so look at the picture on the left. Some of you may have seen it before. It's the top 10 countries by GDP. India didn't even enter that list of the top 10 until about 2011. Okay, and it was down at the bottom, number 10 in 2012. You see the top 4 countries have stayed the same: US, China, Japan, Germany. The only one that's been rising steadily is India. Okay, so India is now the 5th largest economy, larger than the UK, its former colonizer, larger than France, Canada, and so on. This flat line is probably not a good indication of what's happening. India's GDP will continue to grow, and by 2030, it's likely to cross that of Japan. So India will be one of the 3 largest economies in the world. Okay. Now, how does this matter to all of us here? On the right, I have a list of multinational companies, many American and some European, a couple of Japanese, that are all very successful in India. They've been there for a while. Some of them, most of them have revenues of over $100 million already. Johnson & Johnson's revenues in India exceeded $1 billion some time ago. They actually have 2 separate companies in India. So lots of people are making plenty of money in India, despite some of the news that you might read from time to time. There's a tremendous opportunity for smaller companies today, and that's really going to be the focus of my conversation, and any questions that anybody has, we can talk about that. Okay. So in India is not just an opportunity to sell your products there or to source from there. Indian companies are also investing in the United States. And I got this report. This image is taken from an Indian trade group. On the top here, I'm just talking about the overall population. India is now larger than China in population. That's not an accomplishment, but you have to recognize that India is the most populous country in the world now. This second point is important. 10 years ago, nobody in India wanted to work at a startup. If you are a scientist or an engineer graduating from one of India's top schools and you went and joined a startup, everybody would wonder what happened, so is something wrong with you. Well, today it's in the exact opposite. People, families and relatives and everybody knows about venture capital and unicorns, and India is now producing the 3rd largest number of startups and over 100 unicorns last year. During this time, India has also become a top 10 trading partner to the US. Okay, trading partner means you add up the exports and the imports together. And of course, China, Canada, Mexico rank very high. So does Korea. But India entered the top 10 as of last year and will continue rising. I think India may become the 6th largest trading partner to the US fairly soon. Okay. This little graph here shows Indian investments into the US. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that the life sciences is the highest category of investment by Indian companies into the US. Now, I want to be clear, this is not yet into medical devices. This is mostly into pharma, where large pharma companies in India are buying mid-sized pharma companies in the US. Okay, but we'll expect to see soon some activity where Indian companies will start acquiring small to mid-sized medtech companies here in the US as well. Okay, one of my friends started a company called Cardiac Sciences, which made defibrillators, and that was ultimately purchased by a company out of Bangalore. So that has started to happen, but in a small way.
I used to work there.
At Cardiac Sciences?
Cardiac science, yeah.
You must know my friend Prabodh then, Prabodh Mathur.
I love him.
So
he
is on his 3rd gig with a company called Exonics.
Yeah.
Skyrocketed from nothing to $250 million.
They're also founded by Ray Cohen.
Ray Cohen, Rinda Sama, and
I love Rinda.
Yeah, they're a team, whatever they touch turns to gold, at least as long as they're involved.
Well, I wouldn't say that cardiac science turned out to be gold.
While they were there, it did okay, right? That's what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, the company was bought out for $2.25.
Right.
And then the name of the company that bought them is Opto Circuits, but I think that they should be branded Opto Circus, because
I know.
I can't even believe that the philosophy. Now, I was told this is cultural, but I can't believe this to be true, that they just didn't pay their bills. and they were demanding parts from people, saying, you know, give me my order,
Yeah.
or we're not going to pay our. Well, they already weren't paying. I don't know what kind of, but when they were bought in 2011,
Yeah.
I don't understand the conversion of the currencies, but I remember it was 320.
Yeah.
I think it's 2 today. 2.
Yes. The company is pretty
I
much.
didn't know how to short that currency.
Yeah. Company has pretty much been driven to the ground. Yes.
And you have friends there.
No, I don't have friends there. My friends are now at Exonics.
No, I know that. I thought you said you knew people at Opto.
No, I don't know anyone at Opto.
Sorry for the tangent. I just couldn't.
Oh, that's okay. That's very relevant. In fact, towards the end of the presentation, I have a couple of slides about twists that happen in India, and we can talk plenty about that. Okay, let's move on. So this article up here at up top was just published last week in Medical Device Online. And if you can't catch it from here, I'll be happy to send out a link. I think I posted one on the MDG group as well. So you can get it from there, but you know, I'm happy to share it. This is the one that just appeared, like I said, last week. But if you do a keyword search at Medical Device Online on my name, you'll find maybe a dozen articles I've written over the years for them about the medical device ecosystem. And if you're really a glutton for punishment and do the same search on the Harvard Business Review website, hbr.org, you'll see I have a number of articles that I've written with Professor Govindarajan about US and India for the Harvard Business Review. Most recent one was a couple of years ago about the global supply chain, which we will talk about in a couple of minutes. And my friend Alyssa is going to help out on that subject. So there's plenty of additional resources beyond this conversation. That's what I was getting at. All right. So what's driving medical device growth in India? Okay. First of all, it's the local economy in India. India's GDP has been rising, as you saw. And as the GDP is rising, what's happening is that the number of people in the Indian middle class is increasing very rapidly because people are being lifted out of poverty, out of the lower socioeconomic strata into the middle class. At the same time, the income of all Indians is going up. So there's a multiplier effect happening that is causing a fairly rapid growth in the revenue of medical device companies. They've been growing at about 15% per year for the last 8 to 10 years at least. You know, with a little bit of a dip during COVID, of course, where the mix changed because of circumstances. India has released a new medical device policy, the Indian government has, and they're hoping that the changes that they're making will increase the growth rate to well over 20%. I'd say 21% or so is what they're targeting. Okay? And we can get into a few of the issues that are relevant to those of us on this call. There's another factor in India, which is medical tourism, where people from other countries come to India for elective surgeries typically. They of all kinds, you know, from heart surgery to orthopedic work to dental work. Now, you may remember reading articles years ago as if it kind of indicated that many Americans would fly to India to do that. And that's really not happening, frankly. Most of the medical tourism is from countries that are within 4 hours flight from India, a lot from the Middle East, a lot across Southeast Asia, some from Africa, mostly North Africa. But it's over 1 million tourists, a million medical tourists this year, and it keeps growing. Most of the top hospitals in India have a separate section for medical tourists, where they have people who understand the various languages. The families of those folks will typically travel, and they have a way to deal with all of that. The other big driver, which can be an opportunity for those of us who want to innovate for the Indian market, is the Ayushman Bharat program, which essentially means Healthy India. This was announced about 5 years ago. It's similar to Medicaid. And the initial goal was to cover the poorest 500 million Indians. Okay? So right out of the gate, it was the biggest medical insurance program in the world, far bigger than Medicaid on day one. Okay? This year, the government announced that they're going to increase its scope to include people in the lower middle class as well and expand it to 900 million people. Okay? This is mostly a program around hospitalization, not outpatient services. Okay? So when you're talking about 900 million people covered by a single insurance program that is federally administered, it opens up the opportunity to design specific devices that are suitable for India. And we can get into what suitable for India means. Often it is devices that can be used in a rural setting with very little education or training, devices that can run off of batteries rather than AC power, and many, many other factors. They can be basic stripped down devices using modern technology and sensors and so on. Yesterday, I was talking to someone who wants to approach this market, and they believe that their device will be used in 100 million tests per year. Okay, 100 million tests per year. So it's a huge, huge opportunity. But you do have to design devices that are tailored to the Indian market and its needs. Much of that, the last bullet here, revolves around connecting devices to a smartphone. I think that's, India leads in that kind of activity. Whatever can be connected to a smartphone, where you can use the computing power and the ability to load data to the web through through smartphones, is pretty much going to be a requirement, I think, in India today. The insurance program wants to do that because it's much easier to monitor fraud. It's much easier to monitor utilization if data is being uploaded from the field in a live manner day by day rather than in batch mode. Excuse me. Does this make sense? So there are other driving factors too. There's some government policies around promoting manufacturing and so on, but I was listing the key things that we would care about. Just briefly about the medical device classifications, they follow a system very similar to the CE with the A, B, C, D classifications. And what's important is that the company can make its initial assessment as to where they fall between the A, B, C, D. But ultimately, the decision is made by the regulator. So if there's a gray area, then you have to check with the regulator to be sure where the device would fall. Now, this slide I prepared about 4 years ago. There's a whole plethora of different ministries, that regulate medical devices. Much of the regulation comes from the Ministry of Health, but there's some devices are price regulated, and that's handled by the Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers. And why do you ask? Why chemicals and fertilizers? It's because pharmaceuticals were regulated by that ministry. And so they found it convenient to stick medical device regulation under that same ministry. If you have even the tiniest bit of radioactivity, then the Department of Atomic Energy comes into play. So we are working with a company that has a device that destroys cancer using alpha rays, which are pretty much harmless, but we have to get an approval through AERB. And if you have batteries in your device, you've got to go to Consumer Affairs because they handle the industrial standards for all kinds of batteries used in consumer-oriented devices. So, if there's electronics involved, you might have to go to the Ministry of Electronics and IT and so on. So it's quite a mess. And that's why people have sometimes been afraid to deal with the Indian market because of all these complications. So the Indian government, in its new medical device policy, is coming up with a method that they call the single window clearance. Okay. Now, single window is a little bit of hyperbole because India has hundreds of single windows. But once this actually makes it into reality, the plan is that all your documents that you would prepare for an FDA or CE approval could all be loaded into one central repository with the Indian government. And then if you have to submit something to the Department of Atomic Energy or to chemicals and fertilizers or to electronics or whatever, you can manage it all from that one place. But the real value will come from this last point here, that every department is then required to provide you real-time access on that portal. So you log in and you'll be able to see whether the battery is being approved and whether atomic energy is backlogged or whatever. So it becomes a single place where you look at everything. I think Kristen has a question.
Yeah, I just had a question. Is there a timeline for when they plan to roll out this online approval process window?
There is always that rub. That's why I'm saying this will unfold over time. It's complicated to make this happen, as you can imagine. There's the battles between the ministries. There's the software infrastructure that has to be set up. My guess is it will take them at least 2 years, Kristen, before this starts to become reality, and it won't all become reality at one go. Okay, but this is a ambitious plan. The current government, Prime Minister Modi's government, firmly believes in e-governance, as they call it. They're trying to take everything that the government does and make it digital for many, many reasons. So they're determined to make this happen. I would anticipate that in its first iteration, when they announce it's all done, it will still be pretty complicated to use. Just if you think back to when Obamacare became real, it was a disaster at first. Okay, so I think we might encounter some of those issues. But their heart is in the right place. And I think over time, this will absolutely happen and become seamless. But don't hold me to that 2-year timeline. That's just my guess. Does that answer your question, Kristen?
Yeah, thank you. I was just curious if you had insight. So at least 2 years, probably.
Yeah. At this point, they're starting the process. Okay. They announce the policy. The policy has to be converted to rules. Then they've got to hire the vendors to do all this work. Because the government isn't, thankfully, not going to try to program these things themselves. Okay. India has, very sophisticated IT companies. So if one of those wins this contract, I think it'll be, it'll turn out to be a pretty smooth system eventually. Okay. Now so I talked about the market so far, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about market entry and expansion into India. I talked about the regulatory side, but this talk is entitled New Opportunities. Okay. So historically, for the last 25 years, we've thought that any manufacturing, if it goes offshore, there's only one country you think about, and that is China. Okay. For about the last 8 years, I've been advocating this approach of China plus one. And I'm happy to say that that's now pervaded all media parlance now. Everybody uses this term. I should have copyrighted it when I started talking about it. So the big news in the last couple of years has been with Apple, where they asked their vendors, Wistron and Foxconn, to start moving some manufacturing to India. Now, a company with $1 trillion valuation, when they start that process, it is at a massive scale. So already, this is a headline from Mac 9 to 5 from yesterday. They said that Apple has moved over $7 billion of production. This includes the latest iPhones. They're now making iPads as well as the computers in India. Okay? They are already employing over 50,000 workers in Bangalore, in Chennai, through Wistron and Foxconn. It's a mistake to say Apple is manufacturing in India. Apple doesn't manufacture in China either. They are using their Taiwanese contract manufacturers. But it has scaled at a very dramatic pace. And you say, what does that have to do with medical devices? Well, the news from Apple has awakened supply chain officers and CFOs across the entire American ecosystem. So every company of any substance is now looking at, what kind of work they can get done in India for their supply chains. Okay, so this is a tsunami that has been unleashed starting last year, and we at Amrit are getting plenty of inquiries for sourcing items from India. Now, with so many medical devices, the margins are so high that you don't even need to go outside the US at all. And so that will continue. If you're selling something where the cost of goods is 10% of your selling price, then maybe you don't need to go offshore. But over time, this is going to evolve. And I showed President Biden's picture in the beginning because the previous president also focused on supply chain collaboration between the US and India. Okay? The Biden administration has taken it to the next level. So they've opened up collaboration in areas where technology was previously restricted to the US. So things that you could not even take to China are now available to take to India. So the first place this is playing out is in defense, where Navy ships will now be repaired in India. Okay? But there are high-tech components that go into medical devices, particularly on the electronic side, that will now be available to be shipped to India for assembly or manufacturing and so on. Some of you might have read the news that Micron Technology is putting in $3 billion into building its chip packaging and testing plants in the western state of Gujarat. This was announced when Biden was in India last month. So, but let's then make it more specific to medical devices. So just last month, I saw this news item about Reshape Life Sciences, which is based right here in Southern California. And they have licensed this balloon that they have to be manufactured in India by an Indian company. And the Indian company is paying them a license fee to do that. This was just announced recently. But I want to now hand the mic over to my friend Alyssa, who made her very first trip to India earlier this year. So Alyssa, would you tell the audience what your experience was and whatever you feel comfortable sharing?
Absolutely. First off, I want to say that there are plenty of US companies that do not pay their bills. So let's put that on the table real quick. Secondly, I'm a firm believer you give back what you get. And our job is to leave the world a better place. There's an actual quote. It says it's every man's obligation to put back into the world at least the equivalent of what he or she takes out of it. And that was by John Rockefeller. And part of that is we are a global economy now. And we can look at it from the standpoint that if you manufacture only in the US or outside of the US, you're doing a disservice. However, if you can't get the product across the board because our cost to manufacture and our timelines are 54 weeks for production, we're in trouble. So as a startup, so I want to put that on the table, that these are things that I think about as we're going to market. And the initial thing I think of is, where are we going to get funding? In a market where everybody in the US is holding on to their capital, we are at an explosive time for capital not being infused into startup companies. What are my options? I have crowdsourcing. There's a lot of obligations with crowdsourcing, but we started talking with manufacturers, and manufacturers are interested in us. They're interested in diversifying their portfolios. So my CCO, Jeff Dillon, who's a 5-time CEO of various medical device hardware companies throughout the years, with a $350 million acquisition on one of them, has a friend in India, and that friend, Tarek Booch, he is a gentleman, a scholar, and he was the one that helped bring Medtronic pedicle screws into the Indian market about 20-ish years ago. So we're talking to Tarek, and he's like, I have some friends in manufacturing that might be interested in investing in you. And we're thinking to ourselves, wow, this would be incredible. Because not just in the US market, but the global market, about 1% of all capital is given to women-owned companies, female founders, 1%. It's actually lower now. It used to be 3%, then it dropped down to 1%, and now it's even lower than 1%. So I'm already up against, I already know that I have an issue. So I'm thinking, okay, well, let's go over there. Let's see if there's a partnership there. And I cannot tell you how impressed I was. Not only are the people that I'm speaking with, do they not have just their bachelor's degrees, but they have engineering degrees, they have PhDs, multiple MBAs, and their doctorates. So for example, I'll go over and I spoke with one of the neurosurgeons over there. He trained at the same institution that I did my MBA at. And the surgeons there, just like we're seeing in the US, the surgeons are getting a broader perspective by getting additional degrees. And so I think what really hit me as I'm walking away from things, that India in general is looking at this like a Warren Buffett, what we have here because of COVID. COVID impacted us globally. We can't say that nobody got impacted. Every single country got impacted. But what they're doing is interesting, because as we're holding on to our resources right now because we don't know what to expect, India is investing across the board, across the globe, and they're taking in mind Warren Buffett to buy when others are fearful. And so as people are getting out of the investments, they're investing. And I think we're going to see a big trend over the next decade of how this will pay off for India. And I think it could be huge, because after every pandemic, there typically is some type of revolution. The last one was an industrial revolution. I think right now we're going to see a technological, particularly therapeutics, and Maurizio said this over at the Vecchioni, said this at 10X in April. We're going to see an increase in therapeutics. And I see in India investing in therapeutics, combined therapies with therapeutics built in. So again, phenomenal people, kind, compassionate, and I had just an incredible experience. And I hope to always keep the globe in mind throughout my journey.
Thank you, Alyssa. So what were you surprised about when you got to India? This was your first trip. What surprised you when you spent the 3 weeks there?
Well, I mean, so I'm lucky because in my training at WashU, we have an India cohort. So I had and I enjoy other cultures. So I might be unique in the fact that I didn't, there wasn't a lot. I knew that there were a lot of similarities between the Indian culture and the US culture. But there is a very different perspective. Like when I'm talking to somebody in their 70s versus somebody in their 30s, it's very different. Totally. And it's like that here in the US, but more so in India. You are going to be always respectful to your elders, and you're going to serve your elders first. And I think that there's beauty in that. I think that's something that we've lost in the US that I really would like us to adopt again, because I think we've lost sight of that cultural theory of taking care of one of another. But seriously, the only thing that I was really surprised at was because I heard horror stories was not to drink the water. And Tarek goes, Alyssa, you're fine, drink the water. So I did drink the water and I was just fine. So, but it was a phenomenal opportunity, and I'm looking forward to going back in the first quarter.
Awesome.
You have to let us know when.
Okay.
Now the advice that Tarek gave you about drinking the water is not something I would share widely with the rest of the audience here. That is one of the precautions I still recommend. The small percentage of people that have an adverse reaction tend to get very miserable. So I don't drink the water when I go to India either.
Wow. Okay.
Good to know. Well, you know, we were in nice hotels, like 4-star hotels, not 5-star, but 4-star hotels, very cost effective, and in a metropolitan city next to an airport. So that might be a part of that.
Yeah. So for every truth in India, there's an equal and opposite truth. And the first time I got really sick on a business trip to India was when I was not careful eating the tandoori chicken at the US Embassy in New Delhi. You know, I let my guard down. I said, this is the US Embassy. Of course, they'll be careful. I spent the next 2 days in the hotel room, not even being able to get out of bed or make a phone call. I was that sick. So, I mean, India has tremendous opportunity. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to put down India, but I want everyone, when you travel to India, to have a positive experience. And there's plenty of opportunity for that positivity to be diluted. And the last thing you want is an upset tummy, or Delhi belly, as they call it. Alyssa, do you want to take a minute to say what you actually did, like business-wise? Are you comfortable sharing that, or is that still top secret?
Absolutely. I'm forever partners with people that believe in us enough to invest in our seed rounds. Forever, we'll be loyal. And so we first started over in Ahmedabad, over at Solco, India. The beautiful part is God is guest in India, or guest is God, I'm sorry. So we were showered, literally. They had our company's name in flowers as we walk in, and everybody was so kind and generous. And so we walked through the plant. The plant is top notch. It is. And they even have a pedicle screw system that is FDA cleared in the US. And then we toured over to Pune. And we worked with 3D Incredible over there. They've produced over 2,000 custom implants. So they can get an implant custom made for that individual area of the anatomy, the bony anatomy, in 2 weeks turnaround. That's phenomenal. And so we visited their additive manufacturing plants. What was nice about them is they could see the value in what we were doing. So, and then we prayed, again, with the theme of guest is God. We went to the temples, and we got to pray with the chair of one of the temples. There's only 5 chairs, that individual temple, and that temple is a temple of good luck. And it was just unanimously, the vibe that I got was a role of support and caring for one another. And then my most favorite part of the trip was visiting an all-boys school with special needs. And I would love to adopt this in the US in our foster care system. So it's all boys school with special needs, where they don't use medications. They work with the children to overcome and balance themselves through meditation, through a lot of very influential practices about learning how to calm the mind. And these children are so wonderful. And I would seriously like to see an all-girls school. When we get enough funding, I would like to see an all-girls school version of it. And I'd like to bring it over to adopt their practices in the US foster care system. It's phenomenal. And
so full disclosure, I'm an advisor to Alyssa's company. I want to state that here for everyone's benefit. It's been fun working with her and her team. So let me switch to a couple of more light-hearted topics here. Alyssa had a very positive and pleasant experience, but India can be confusing. In fact, my general line to people is, if you go to India and you come back and you're not confused, you just haven't looked hard enough. Right? So this sign up here on the top right, it was driving from Bangalore to Mysore, and on the outskirts of Mysore, we saw this sign, the Palmyra, tenements, resorts, and accommodation. Now, I had never heard the word tenements until I came to the US, and my understanding of the word tenement was really low-end project housing. Is that how everyone thinks of it? Okay.
Yes.
So for my first reaction was, oh, these poor guys, they don't know English well. Okay. And that's why they use the word tenements. But I've learned to stop myself and think a little bit deeper. The word tenements acquired that meaning in the US about 100, 150 years ago. Before that, the literal meaning of the word tenement was multi-unit housing, like an apartment complex. Okay? So these guys were not wrong in describing their luxury resort as, consisting of tenements. It was my view, having lived for so many decades in this country, that I was using the American meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Alyssa illustrated this, embedded in her talks, that when you go to India, you have to go with an open mind and you have to be humble, which is very hard for us as Americans. I'm American, I've lived here for most of my life. We believe that everything in the US is the best, which is true. But we also believe everything American is right. And that could not be further from the truth. The people who succeed, the Americans who succeed in India the most, are those who are willing to be curious and humble and listen carefully, which is what Alyssa illustrated in many points in her, in her conversation here. So here's another example. This is a little bit of a, what's a tree doing in the middle of the road? Why would that be permitted? Okay, so if you know India a little bit, you know about all the red tape in India. And so you might come to the conclusion, oh, the street widening department didn't talk to the tree cutting department, and that in that red tape, this tree still stands right in the middle of the road. Okay. And that would be an initial iterative guess that might be right. But this picture was taken on a special day when there was almost no traffic, okay, which is very rare in India. On a normal day, all this area between the tree and the road here would be chock full of parked vehicles lined with push carts next to it. And I'm sure, Alyssa, you saw that in your time in both Ahmedabad and Pune. So, you can tell here, this part of the road has leaves and stuff, and this part has been driven on much more, right? So if you're really observant, you realize that the tree is not really a big hazard. for the most part, because this area, this side of the road is not used by moving traffic. Okay, so I use that to illustrate the fact that India is, understanding India takes peeling layers of the onion.
But Gunjan, I would say though, I
Uh-huh.
felt safer walking through traffic on streets like this than I ever would feel safe on 2-lane, 4-lane streets in the US, because most people are on mopeds. So, and people drive slower. You're not seeing 65-mile-an-hour cars going by. You're seeing 20 to 35-mile-an-hour cars. And so they stop, they pause, they look for each other. Everybody's always aware. However, Mumbai is very different. Mumbai is a whole nother level. It's New York City times 20. So
Yeah.
don't do that. Do not abide by that philosophy. Mumbai.
Absolutely.
How many cities did you visit, Alyssa?
We visited 3 cities, and then we took a 3-hour train ride. That was phenomenal with the open glass top. Yeah, if you are a person that likes chain restaurants and all that stuff, India is not for you. If you're curious and you're open-minded and humble, and you really enjoy other cultures, India is for you all the way.
It really pained me to take my kids to Paris and have them migrate to McDonald's. It's like, what do you?
Yeah.
Happens in India too. People migrate to Starbucks. Now, I'll tell you, my wife is a complete fan of Starbucks. There isn't a day when she doesn't drink a Starbucks, large Starbucks cup here. She won't enter a Starbucks in India at all, because the coffee there is crap. And it's particularly ironic now because Starbucks CEO is of Indian origin, right in your town, Joe, right? Lakshman Narasimhan. I tweeted at him as soon as he took over, saying, please fix the coffee in India. It's really a poor copy of what we have here in the US.
Gunjan, before we conclude, tell us comprehensively what Amrit does for folks. I think of you when I think somebody asked me an India question, talk to Gunjan.
Right. So
is it anything? I used to think about you as, if you are looking for distribution or you're looking for strategic advice. It sounds to me though as though you're also someone to ask if we need contract manufacturing.
Oh, absolutely.
Supply chain questions.
And any business question about India, we either have the answer or can find the answer for our clients.
And how many employees does Amrit have?
We are about 25 people, most of them located in India, and virtually all of them with more than 20 years of experience in industry. So my medical device leader used to work for Becton Dickinson. He ran the largest business unit for them in India.
How long have you been part of the group?
I'm sorry?
How long have you been part of the group?
Well, I started the company, so I've been there, from day one, over 20 years.
Okay.
And we work in many different industries. We're talking about medical devices here, but we work in biopharma, we work in electronics, we work in defense, and many, many other sectors. But I used to teach a workshop at Caltech on doing business in India, and a company called Covidian attended our workshop, and that's what sucked me into the medical device business. And then Roche Diagnostics hired us. So we do quite a bit of work in medical devices, which is why I'm going to be at the MedTech conference, where some of us will be there. Whether you want to sell to India or your clients want to sell to India or buy from India potentially, one thing we didn't talk about at all in this talk is how to use India's technical talent. Okay? We do a lot of work around that, where we can either find a third party to help you with product design or clinical trials or preclinical work, or if you are working with a mid-size or larger company, you can set up your own so-called captive R&D center in India.
Well, it sounds as though my summary statement of if India, then Gunjan works pretty well. So if you do have a question or you are thinking about lower cost and other strategic advantages, give that man a call. And I think next week, while scheduled, I might push back so that we can collectively say, have a conversation. I don't even know who to put as the lead on this. What you missed at AdvaMed, since there are going to be so many of us there, that we can all give a perspective about what we saw and experienced. So let's do that. And I'll see many of you on Monday for food and drink, which is delightful. I put the link in the chat, so if you haven't already registered for that, please do. And special thanks to our featured guest today, Gunjan. Not
Thank you
only
so
for
much.
this, but for putting us up at his brother's place in a few months.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great week.
Yeah. Bye-bye now.
Bye now.